Checkpoint is next. See you later.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, overseas nurses get the green light for fast-tracked residency as the government hits reverse on its immigration policy. The Minister here is here with all the details. MB gets a serve from the Chief Ombudsman, who says the Ministry acted unreasonably over MIQ and the allocation of spots. Judge Peter Bosher is live. It's raining pollution in Auckland, including 3 million bottles worth of microplastics. The main road north is driving some motorists to the repair shop and others to despair. Waka kotahi on why the State Highway 1 is falling to bits. You can watch us live, Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister denies the government has waited too long to get overseas nurses and midwives onto the straight-to-residence pathway. From Thursday, registered nurses and midwives will be able to apply for residency immediately, including those already in New Zealand. Since the Green List was established in July, nurses have had to work for 2 years to get residence, which the healthcare sector and opposition have heavily criticised. Jacinda Ardern says in a crowded global market, New Zealand needed to make its position more attractive.
That pathway that was already there has made a difference, but the competition is only going to increase. Let's get ahead of that and remove any perception that anywhere is presenting a better offering than us into the future.
10 professions have been added to the work to residency pathway, including primary and secondary school teachers. A woman who took legal action when she was pregnant after her travelling husband couldn't secure an MIQ spot says the treatment she received was appalling. Roshni Sami filed a judicial review in the High Court a year ago after the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment rejected an application for medical support. The Chief Ombudsman today revealed the Ministry acted unreasonably over MIQ and didn't consider personal circumstances. Ms Sami says the system was a clear breach of human rights.
Pregnancy is a unique situation and women and their unborn child are absolutely vulnerable and it must be protected to the highest degree. So why, during a global pandemic, were New Zealand women locked out or why were their partners locked out?
Roshni Sami says her husband was allocated an MIQ voucher but only after legal proceedings had been filed. An employers group says it's surprised there are systemic problems with the recognised seasonal employer scheme. A new report by the Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner has found major gaps in the RSE scheme leave room for human rights abuses. New Zealand Ethical Employers members account for 60% of RSE workers. Chair Tanya Pofade says it has zero tolerance for unethical employers.
Our NZE members have been really concerned with the allegations because if they are doing everything in their power to do what's right and then we hear of allegations of people not doing the correct employment practices and to a high standard like themselves, it's really disappointing.
Tanya Pofade says the group has declined membership to 3 employers but provided education so they can build up standards. The Health and Disability Commissioner has found a GP, a medical centre and a DHB all at fault after a 3-year-old girl having an asthma attack was overdosed with adrenaline. In 2019, the child went to the medical centre with a cough, then returned the next day with worsening asthma symptoms. The report found that the girl wasn't given oxygen despite not being able to breathe properly and was then overdosed with adrenaline after she collapsed. While resuscitation was attempted, the child died. Commissioner Morag McDowell says the report highlights the importance of ensuring that staff are trained to provide appropriate care in stressful emergencies. And Aucklanders teased with stunning weather today instead faced a swimming ban after heavy weekend rain caused sewage runoff at dozens of beaches. Wastewater overflow breached national guidelines for swimming at beaches including Mission Bay, St Heliers, Herne Bay, Takapuna and Titirangi Beach. Locals were frustrated.
Yes, it is, because I'm soaking hot.
Shame, yeah, shame. You can't go in yet.
Surely it's frustrating. Something needs to be done.
You would like to swim, right? Not good enough.
But I think it's awful. Whichever country you're in, I think it's absolutely atrocious that it's discharged into the sea.
Played abroad on a summer holiday, eh?
I know. Very, very disappointing.
Auckland Council's Nick Vigar says sewage runoff is a common problem after heavy rain. In sport, Auckland has proven to be a popular choice as a base camp location for teams competing in next year's Women's Football World Cup. Dedicated team base camps for training and accommodation are being introduced for the first time at the tournament, being co-hosted by New Zealand and Australia. 7 teams, including the Football Ferns and reigning champions USA, have opted to train out of Auckland for the duration of the group stages of the tournament. Hamilton, Tauranga, Palmerston North, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin will also host teams. 5 Australian cities and 2 regional centres will be base camp locations. And the White Ferns batter, Susie Bates, broke another record in the opening one-day win over Bangladesh in Wellington, and she's hoping her form will continue through the series and into February's T20 World Cup. The opener blasted an unbeaten 93 runs in yesterday's 8-wicket victory as the hosts chased down Bangladesh's 180-run total with 114 balls to spare. Bates is now the White Ferns' highest scorer in New Zealand, surpassing Amy Satterthwaite.
I find those stats, it's just because I've been playing a long time, and Amy was great, and she was one of our greatest one-day players, and she scored a truckload of runs. So, yeah, I guess that's something I'll look back on in my career, but at the moment I'm just sort of trying to enjoy every game as it comes.
Game 2 of the 3-game ODI series is in Napier on Wednesday. That's the news.
Coming back to Earth.
And there it is. High over the Pacific, America's new ticket to ride to the moon and beyond now in view. Splashdown.
Soaring at the World Cup.
The rest of the Arab nations have really just jumped on that bandwagon, and whether they are from Algeria or Egypt or Palestine, they all are Moroccan at heart.
And a clarification.
Yes, quite right. Sewage is what's at the beach. Sewerage is the pipes that it's supposed to be in. We aim to get it right. Morning Report, weekdays 6 to 9 here on RNZ National.
We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel mostly fine. Some isolated showers this afternoon and again tomorrow. For Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumadunui, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Isolated showers today, some heavy with possible thunderstorms about Eastern Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Tomorrow, scattered showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. From Waitomo to Wellington, including Taihape, also Waded Upper, fine today. Showers tomorrow, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. Marlborough and Nelson, mostly fine. Isolated showers inland this afternoon and evening, possibly heavy. Bulla and Westland, a few showers becoming confined to the ranges this afternoon and fine spells developing. Canterbury, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy about the east coast with patchy drizzle tomorrow morning, then becoming fine around midday tomorrow, mainly fine elsewhere. Isolated showers this afternoon and evening. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, low cloud and occasional rain clearing tomorrow afternoon. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines updates for you at 5:20 as well as any traffic news.
Ngā mihi for that cheery weather report. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Overseas nurses get the green light to jump straight onto the path to residency, bypassing a 2-year work requirement as part of a government redo of its immigration settings announced in the past hour. The move follows intense criticism from the opposition in the health sector over nurses previously being left off the top tier of the list. Te Piramia, Jacinda Ardern, says the government is responding to those calls.
The numbers speak for themselves. When you have record numbers applying to the Nursing Council, internationally qualified nurses, record numbers applying for the ability to work in New Zealand, it demonstrates that we were attracting nurses. We want to get ahead of the issue though. We've been asked to simplify it, and we've listened and we've made that change.
10 new professions have been added to the fast track to residency, including some construction workers, but they'll still have to do 2 years at the coalface before starting the residency process. Under the changes announced today, there'll also be sweeteners or streamlined immigration for bus and truck drivers and long-term critical workers looking to move here. Well, joining us now is the Immigration Minister, Michael Wood. Tēnā koe e te Minister, why did it take you so long to make this change to the nurses on the green list?
Well, Lisa, over the last few months, we've said that we will continue to engage with the sector and that we were open to making changes if that was necessary to make sure that New Zealand's offer and our attractiveness was where we needed it to be. And what we've seen is that the global environment has become more and more competitive. These shortages are evident in every country. We've seen other countries change settings. So we've been pragmatic and said that we'll do what it takes to make sure that we've got the most simple settings that are clear to communicate and help us to attract the workers we need.
Nothing's actually changed from when you did this. There were shortages internationally before that, and your critics and also the health sector knew that nurses needed to be on the fast track then. Why couldn't you see it?
Well, I'd say a couple of things there, Lisa. The first is that the changes that we made were a significant advance on the settings that were made that were in place previously. So since COVID, we've had 3,400 nurses come in. So we actually have been making good progress at attracting nurses to New Zealand. But what we have seen over the last few months, the international competition has got more intense. We have seen more countries and jurisdictions continue to improve the attractiveness of residency offers. We've always said that notwithstanding the fact that the 2-year pathway to residency was attractive, it was more attractive than anything we previously had, we'd always look to see if there was more that we could do.
It wasn't attractive enough though, was it, Minister? It wasn't attractive enough. You got it wrong, didn't you? Despite everyone warning you, you got it wrong and you carried on with it.
Well, all I would say, Lisa, is that what we did was we put in place settings that were more attractive than before. We're now accelerating and improving those further. We've listened to the feedback we got from the sector, and this is going to make it, I think, even easier for us to recruit the nurses that we need in New Zealand. But I'll just keep coming back to this. Every country around the world is experiencing these shortages and these changes. So there's never been any magic switch that you can just flick on or off in the immigration system. It's about having a package of measures that put us in the best possible position. I think this will help us with that.
One of your main concerns for not fast-tracking nurses, you said at the time, was because there was evidence that they were going to come here and immediately go on to other jobs. So what assurances have you had that they're not going to come here and, become baristas or swim coaches or whatever else?
Well, we had a number of particular concerns at the time. So one, for example, came from us within the sector, and that was in the area of aged care nurses, where there was a concern that nurses coming into that area might go into other areas because there was a pay differential. Now, since that time, the Aged Care Association has changed their position, partly because of the fact that we're putting the money in to deal with that pay parity issue. So we've dealt with that as we're continuing to put money in to make sure that our nurses are paid well also. So we're doing the work to make sure that we make this an attractive place for people to stay in once they come here. And overall, we think that on the balance, making sure that we get enough nurses here to fill the roles is the most important thing.
Prime Minister said this morning we have an attraction issue. We need to go out and make sure we can recruit and bring these workers in. So what specifically is the attraction issue? Your immigration settings?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, Lisa. Our immigration settings, broadly speaking, are enabling a lot of people to be recruited. We've been permission for over 90,000 migrant workers to be recruited.
So what is the
by New Zealand
attraction issue specifically, Minister?
Well, what I'm saying is that our settings are enabling employers to go out and recruit. But we're in an international market where every country, in every one of these areas that we talk about, with nurses, hospo, tourism, other important areas, every country has shortages. So we need to keep reviewing our settings.
I understand that, Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, but it's really important. The Prime Minister, as recently as this morning, said we have an attraction issue. Can you please tell me specifically what is New Zealand's attractiveness issue?
Well, the attraction issue that she was describing here was the fact that every country is constantly looking at their settings and competing for a very scarce pool of labour. So if we want to be attractive, that's what we have to do. That's what you've seen us to do today, not just across nurses, but across a range of other important areas, including, for example, bus drivers, where for 20 years we haven't been paying those people enough to attract and retain people. Well, we're fixing that by improving pay and also supporting it through the immigration system. So you see that balance coming into our settings to make sure that we don't just attract people in, but we retain them here in New Zealand as well.
Thank you for joining us. That is the Immigration Minister, Michael Wood there. You can text us your thoughts on 2101 or you can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Has the government moved fast enough on this one? If not, why not? Let us know your thoughts. Aucklanders are seemingly unable to escape pollution in the city, whether it's coming from the sky, in the sea or in our drinking water. Dozens of beaches across Auckland have been unsafe for swimming over the weekend. An Onehunga water plant has been shut down over fears of chemical contamination, and scientists have found the equivalent of 3 million bottles worth of microplastics dropping on the city every year. Jonty Dine reports.
A sparkling Monday morning in Auckland was a bit of a tease for these beachgoers, looking out at the glistening but forbidden waters of Mission Bay.
Yes, it is, because I'm soaking hot.
Shame, shame. You can't go in yet.
Surely it's frustrating. Something needs to be done.
You would like to swim, right? Not good enough.
But I think it's awful. Whichever country you're in, I think it's absolutely atrocious that it's discharged into the sea.
Way to ruin a summer holiday,
I know. Very, very disappointing.
Mission Bay was one of several Auckland beaches off limits this morning because heavy rain over the weekend made the levels of fecal bacteria unsafe for swimming. Though not all were aware of the unseen dangers.
I would have gone in today, looking at that blue sea, I would have just been in.
But I didn't actually realise we weren't meant to be swimming in there.
While frustrated, some locals were more pragmatic.
Well, it would be nice if there's more done. Well, there's not much we can do about it.
Yeah, hopefully tomorrow we'll go to another beach and a place which is safe, where it's safe to swim.
Yeah, I can understand it. It's cost a lot of money to sort it out. I suppose that's the issue.
Auckland Council's Safe Swim Program Manager, Nick Vega, says it is an historic and common issue.
It's largely due to 100-year-old drainage networks, combined drainage networks, and so the Western Isthmus Program and the Eastern Isthmus Program, which are in train at the moment, will over time attend to those, but that's big investment.
And it's not the only environmental threat facing Tamaki Makaurau. Researchers from the University of Auckland calculated the equivalent of more than 3 million bottles worth of microplastics falling from the sky every year. Lead author Dr. Joel Rindalab from Auckland University says more work needs to be done to understand the extent of the damage.
Well, we're seeing plastics everywhere across the globe, so I think the time is now to really try to limit the amount of plastic waste that we're generating.
Mr. Rindalab says it is not yet clear what detriment it'll have on the population's health.
There is potential for health effects related to some of the plastic additives, things that might be endocrine disrupting or affect the hormone balance of the body. So this is something that would, of course, need to be researched further to understand exactly what the potential issues could be.
As well as our air and favourite swimming spots, Auckland's drinking water is also under threat. Watercare has shut down its treatment plant in Onehunga after finding a contaminant above threshold levels. It says it did not know how long it would be shut, but it would probably be out for more than a year.
Jonty Dine with that report. MBIE may be forced to apologise to individuals over flaws in the MIQ allocation system after an investigation found it acted unreasonably. The Chief Ombudsman launched his review after getting about 270 complaints, many with common themes. It found while MBIE, the lead agency for MIQ, was working with complex issues in a high-stakes environment, the system caused immense stress and frustration for tens of thousands of people trying to enter New Zealand. It concludes MBIE's advice on the design and administration of MIQ allocations failed to give sufficient emphasis to individual circumstances and prioritisation, and it didn't ensure adequate ways for users with disabilities to access the online allocations. Joining us now is the Chief Ombudsman, Judge Peter Bosher. Kia ora. In this report, Judge, you quote the country's first Ombudsman and you say, "I shall look for reason, justice, sympathy and honour." Did you find any of those things in the way MBIE handled this situation?
No, we felt that in this scheme, Lisa, and good afternoon to you, that this was a hugely invasive, coercive scheme stopping New Zealanders from coming back into their country and often putting them in the most desperate situations. We found that just to have one system and one approach, irrespective of a person's individual circumstances, didn't do much for justice and didn't do much for honour.
What should they have done? Because you acknowledge yourself it was a time-sensitive situation and this was a system that potentially saved lives. So what was the alternative?
I think when it started off, you could understand why MB had to move and get something off the shelf. But any system, if it's going to have integrity, must look at individual circumstance. The way I have been brought up and trained is not to treat everyone the same, but to look at everyone individually to see what their circumstances are. Lisa, some of these people should have been prioritised, but everyone went into the same waiting room, often went into the same queue, in the end missed out, or didn't, as the case may be. It really was a lottery.
Who should have been prioritised?
There are lots of people that should have been prioritised. Those that added a benefit to New Zealand, those whose personal situations were such that it just made the heart wrench. Someone, for instance, returning for the birth of a child, someone returning for a loved one about to die. Surely we could have had a system that looked, waited, gave a priority system instead of saying that's too difficult, too burdensome. Everyone, I'm afraid, will have to be treated in the same way.
What harm did you find that this has done?
Well, I'm just going to, if you don't mind, read you one story, and I'll keep it short. But this is the sort of thing that all of our complaints have said something about. This is a complainant. My mental health is suffering. I'm usually a strong person, but the absurdity and unfairness of the MIQ system makes it hard to cope. An extra difficulty is that I have no access to Wi-Fi unless I bus to the local library, which of course does not keep New Zealand time, making it difficult to communicate and engage in a timely fashion. Now, this was an older lady in Scotland who found it really hard to get back, reconnect with family, and couldn't navigate the system. It's the sort of stress that it caused people and the utter frustration that we saw in their letters that made me think surely there could have been a better way.
You have indicated that you may direct MB to make personal apologies. What for and what criteria are you going to use?
Well, because I think that if there is a case where there is a genuine sense of grievance and we're having regard to what we've said could have been done better, then does need to be a sense of closure for people and a sense that they feel justice has been done and they've been listened to. I find in this job what often people want is to be listened to and to be acknowledged, and an apology goes a long way in doing that. I'm not saying everyone, I'm saying a number were in dire situations and that we found were treated unreasonably at the end of the day.
Potentially, though, that could still be hundreds of people.
Well, there were 270 complaints related to this particular investigation. It won't be until MB goes through each one, and these are 270 people all wanting justice and expecting it. They've got the right to have that as far as I'm concerned. This will take time and effort, but that's what I'm here for.
You make a particular comment that I'm interested in. You said you don't have the power to force government ministers to apologise, but you note more than once that ministers were involved in key decisions. They were in the meetings. They made policy decisions. So while you don't have the power, Judge, do you think ministers should be making personal apologies to some of these people?
That is really going to be for a matter for ministers to ruminate upon and to make their decision. I want to answer your question as best I can. I just want to make the point here, whoever is going to make an apology, that what people most want is a feeling that they've been taken seriously. Who does that and how it's done it is a matter for ministers, and it's a matter especially for MB.
Yeah, I know you don't want to overstep your job, but in essence, you're asking them to take a look at themselves and question whether they should be involved in the apology process, aren't you, at the very least?
Yes, but I'm standing well short of saying who should do what because I'm not allowed to outstep my jurisdiction. I'm really careful and particular about that so that people don't think I'm commenting about everything and anything. I think it's important people know that my job is to restore mana and to restore dignity. That's what I want. Who does it? That's up to them.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Judge Peter Bosher, who's our Chief Ombudsman. He's basically given MB a bit of a serve for the way they handled MIQ and in particular the allocations process. 23 minutes after 5, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko mai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. I'm sure a lot of you will have something to say about MIQ and the allocations. That report from the Ombudsman finding fault with the way the system worked and suggesting that MB may make some personal apologies to those who were left out in the cold. Also, the government doing a bit of a U-turn on its immigration settings, putting nurses on the fast track to residency, no longer have to spend 2 years working here before they start applying. Your thoughts on that one? 2101 on text, or you can email us, checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. We're heading to the headlines now. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Immigration Minister Michael Wood admits New Zealand needs to work harder to attract and retain overseas nurses and midwives, but says today's immigration shake-up should help. From Thursday, registered nurses, specialist doctors and midwives will have an immediate pathway to residency, including those already in the country. Michael Wood told Checkpoint that international competition has become more intense during the pandemic. A woman who took legal action when she was pregnant after her travelling husband couldn't secure an MIQ spot says her treatment was appalling. The Chief Ombudsman today revealed the ministry acted unreasonably over MIQ and didn't consider personal circumstances. Roshni Sami says her husband was allocated an MIQ voucher, but only after legal proceedings had been filed. An employers group says it's surprised there are systemic problems with the recognised seasonal employer scheme. A new report by the Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner has found major gaps in the RSE scheme leave room for human rights abuses. New Zealand Ethical Employers members account for 60% of RSE workers, and its chair, Tanya Pofari, says there's zero tolerance for unethical employers. And the Ministry of Health is reporting 40,098 new COVID-19 cases in the past week, an increase of more than 5,500. 22 deaths have also been attributed to the virus in the last 7 days. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, normal peak hour traffic flow around the country at the moment. I'll have news headlines and traffic for you again at 5:40.
Kia ora rā, Eho. 7 different regions in New Zealand will see the spin-off of co-hosting next year's Women's Football World Cup. 16 teams will be based here for the biggest sporting event held in Aotearoa. And this afternoon it's been revealed where those teams will be staying and training. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, what can you tell us, Felicity?
So these team bases are quite an unusual concept for a Women's World Cup. If we cast our mind back maybe to 2011 with the Rugby World Cup, where teams were based in communities all around the country, that's kind of a concept of what this is. It's a headquarters, accommodation and training places for each of these 16 teams. There were 21 possible options that these teams could have chosen from. Once they were here for that draw of the tournament, they took a bit of a tour of the country and had a look around and saw which ones appealed to them.
Who gets the US?
Well, that's Auckland. So there are seven teams that will be based out of Auckland, and that's including the US and the Football Ferns. Both of them have chosen that. And so if we use the Football Ferns as an example, they'll play at Eden Park in Wellington and in Dunedin, but they'll use Keith Hay Park, which is Mount Roskill, so a bit of a real suburban community ground, as their training facility. So you'll be able to see them floating around. As well, like the USA, they'll be based in Auckland, but they'll also be going out to East Coast Bays over on the North Shores. That is Bay City Park that they'll be using for their training. So I guess there's probably a bit of high security around, but if you did want to pop out and see these teams sort of training in the environment of them during a World Cup, that's an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that they will be accessible to a certain degree.
Exactly, and it's the likes, this is a particularly big coup for the likes of Christchurch, who don't get any games during the tournament, but they've picked up 2 teams. Costa Rica and Japan have chosen to be based out of Christchurch. Also, Palmerston North, another place with no games during the tournament, but they've got Spain, who will be going to the Massey University Sport Institute, so they'll be based out there as well. Quite a big deal for the Manawatu to have a team like that floating around. Tauronga's Bay Oval gets the Netherlands. Again, another big name team in women's football. Yeah. And maybe they've been lured in by the nice weather down there. But
I'd love to know on what basis these teams chose these spots.
Well, FIFA did say a little bit earlier, some teams want the hype of Auckland, the accessibility to be sort of in the spotlight, I guess, whereas some teams might want to go to some of a smaller place, a bit of a quieter place, maybe be slightly off the radar during a tournament where it can be, I guess, a lot going on and can be quite high pressure on their athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, mixed morning for the New Zealand Sevens team. How are they shaping up ahead of next month's Hamilton leg of the World Series?
So the Black Ferns thrashed Australia this morning, world champions. It was a bit of a turnaround from the last weeks in Dubai. So New Zealand won this morning. Great for them. It brings them level with Australia in terms of standings for the World Series. The women have actually only played 2 rounds so far. The men, not so great this morning. Well, they made it to the final, finished with the silver to Samoa, but they're still third after 3 rounds on the world standings. So once the teams do actually arrive back in New Zealand, they get a month off of competition, so it's mid-January when they'll be here in Hamilton. This is an opportunity maybe to see some of the Black Ferns that we haven't seen playing in the Seven Circuit for a little while. The likes of Stacey Flula, Ruby Tui, Portia Woodman. They've taken a bit of a break after that 15s World Cup. So maybe we'll see them back in Hamilton, but I guess the team's doing pretty all right without them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Felicity. Felicity Reid with sports there. The RNZ-TVNZ merger looks to be on thin ice as the Prime Minister tells her colleagues to find some fat to trim over the summer holidays. Jacinda Ardern says the government's focus will be on getting New Zealanders through the cost of living crisis next year. Anything beyond that could be dumped. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
With grim economic storm clouds brewing, the government's warning 2023 is going to be tough. In anticipation, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has set her ministers some holiday homework.
We will be spending some time over summer casting our eye over the agenda to make sure that where we are investing our energy and resources, they are on those areas that New Zealanders would expect us to be.
Ms Ardern won't say if particular projects are on the chopping block.
I do want to just give a bit of time for us to go back and to go through that exercise.
But political commentator and former National Party Press Secretary Ben Thomas suspects plans to merge RNZ and TVNZ will be ditched.
Not really a burning hot button issue for the public, but something that media takes a lot of interest in, and so does tend to be a bit of a distraction and also a pretty clunky piece of work. You can imagine that would sort of go in the waste disposal.
The public media reforms have attracted the increasing attention of opposition parties, with MPs using every opportunity to attack the merger and its cost.
What will the cost of Aotearoa New Zealand public media be to New Zealand taxpayers over the next 30 years?
Does the Minister intend his merged entity to compete with Netflix? And if so, is competing with a $100 billion multinational corporation is seriously a good use of hundreds of millions of Kiwis' hard-earned dollars?
Can she explain to the New Zealand public why, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, her government is merging TVNZ and Radio New Zealand?
Peter Thompson from Better Public Media is warning of significant consequences if the merger doesn't go ahead.
This is a policy that's looking really very much at the longer term future, and we need to create a multi-platform public media entity that can provide services to a much wider range of audiences than is currently the case. And I think that's what we're going to lose. It's not just what we're going to lose tomorrow, it's what we're going to lose in 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Ben Thomas thinks the future of local government review, the income insurance scheme and the implementation of her puapua could also be at risk.
The things that they'll be looking at will be what can get through before the election, what can perhaps survive after the election if the worst case scenario happens and they're not returned to power. And the third thing is what could be done by that time, but is sort of more nice to have and kind of blocks up the agenda and sort of slows things down.
It's not just the work program that's in for a shake-up, the cabinet lineup is too. Ms Ardern is expected to announce a handful of ministerial retirements this week. She'll unveil a caucus reshuffle in the new year.
Katie Scotcher reporting there. Let's get to some of your feedback. A lot of it coming in on immigration. Nurses being put on the fast track, no longer have to work 2 years before going down the residency path. This person says, can you please put some more emphasis on the fact that the Labour government is listening and responding whilst ensuring good policy is put in place? This ongoing negativity does nothing to help New Zealand move forward. Another says, great to see that nurses have been added to the fast tracking for immigration. How come Australia beat us months ago in making a similar decision? Yeah, so nurses were on the green list previously, but they had to work for 2 years before they could apply for residency. Not so anymore. They're being given the same priority as doctors. Another says, so where is this magical influx of nurses going to live when we have people sleeping in cars presently? Christine says the Labor government has not done enough. Always a plan for a plan and always on the back foot. Blaming global issues is pathetic. And this one before we move on, the government has been far too slow to let medical staff in. They may have just loosened the settings for nurses, but not for doctors. Yeah, I think green list fast track for all doctors, they said today. My brother met 2 doctors in Dunedin who are taking their families back to California as they were unable to get their visas extended. It's unbelievable incompetence on the part of the government. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it is time for the business news. Ko taku hoe e nai nei, ko Anand Zaki. Tēnā koe, Anand. Prepare for long queues at our airports over the summer, you say.
Yeah, Christmas Grinch, I think that's my role today. Look, this certainly isn't what we're hoping for, is it, over the holiday period? It's the first summer of restriction-free travel, and the airports are seeing major staff shortages right across the board. And that means get ready for longer wait times, be patient. Now's not the time to throw a tantrum at people just doing their jobs. We recently had Auckland Airport sound the alarm bells. They said there were about 1,600 vacancies across the airport precinct, and that's despite more than 500 being filled at its mid-year job fair. And all sorts of jobs are available. There's cabin crew, check-in staff, baggage handlers, security staff, and even emergency services. And of course, all this is because when travel essentially halted at the height of the pandemic, thousands were laid off, and now travel is rebounding strongly, and everyone is trying to hire staff again. We spoke to the Chief Executive of the Airports Association, Billy Moore, and she told us that because aviation is just so interconnected, challenges in one area will have a flow-on effect onto other areas. And she told us that it's the main airports, especially those that have international connections. So think Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington and Queenstown. That's where we could see some of the issues. So we have the usual advice from the airports for travellers: plan ahead, get there early, and hopefully we can avoid what we saw in the Northern Hemisphere over their summer, which, if you remember, was pretty chaotic.
Right, so prepare to be in a queue if you're going away on a break that involves flying. And, oh, yeah, by the way, your Christmas dinner or lunch is going to cost you a whole lot more, Anand. Grocery prices keep shooting up.
They do. Here's the second bit of bad news for you today. The cost increases from grocery suppliers to supermarkets, that's up more than 10% in the year ended November. We have a price index from economics consultancy Infometrics and the supermarket co-op Foodstuffs. They operate Foods, Pack and Save and New World. So in November alone, 8,000 items went up in price, and the price of 11% of the goods rose more than 20% before they reached the supermarket shelves. So some quite steep increases. So what's driving this? Well, Infometrics, they say higher imported food costs, on-farm and transport costs are the main reasons. And they say the rapid increase in the costs of traditionally less volatile things like general groceries, this reinforces the cost pressure that's being seen. So what does this mean for us? Well, likely higher prices at the checkout, although supermarkets have always been quick to say they absorb as much as they can before passing it on. I'll let you be the judge of that.
Shall we take a quick spin around the markets, Anand?
Yeah, NZX Top 50 closed the day at 11,506, falling 90 points, or about 0.75%. New Zealand dollar is just a shade under 64 US cents and 94.3 Australian.
Thank you, Anand. That's Anand Zaki with Business News. A scheme ripe for exploitation of workers with few consequences for those who do. The report into the treatment of staff under the RSE scheme has found major gaps, and the government's been told to get an urgent review underway. Advocates say there needs to be a fundamental culture shift for how the RSE workers are treated, but the industry says it's already putting in the work. Kirsty Frame reports.
The Equal Opportunities Commissioner looked under the hood of the RSE scheme and was shocked at what she found. Freezing, crowded, damp living conditions, unreasonable pay deductions and poor access to healthcare. Saunoa Mali'i Kararina Solmeo says there are inherent cases of racism and extreme cases akin to modern-day slavery. Pacific Legal's Richard Small says employers are able to exploit workers with no consequences.
Condition in their contract that forbids criticism of the employer. Immigration New Zealand are well aware. We have sent them copies. These employment agreements, although with individual employers, forbid any criticism online of the employer, ever and at all.
The Commissioner is calling for an urgent review and to tighten employment standards. But Richard Small says without a major culture shift, any solutions risk window dressing the issue. He says there is an underlying attitude of seeing RSE workers as units of production rather than people.
That mindset is always going to lead to abuse. It seems ironic that Immigration New Zealand, who have done quite a bit of work in the area of worker exploitation, when it faces the Pacific, continues to accept illegal employment conditions.
Richard Small says treatment of RSE workers is causing havoc on communities back in the Pacific. Cause Collective lead and Pacific community leader Jerome Mika says the onus is on New Zealand to sort it out.
We all know that a lot of our employers are getting a massive return in productivity and increase. Then we should just be fair for these workers and ensure that they're given a fair pay when they are there and also that they're able to bring money back to their family.
The report has come as a surprise to some of the industry who say they've already got most of the recommendations in play. New Zealand Ethical Employers audits and accredits primary industry members for meeting human rights and workplace standards. Its members account for 60% of RSE workers across 41 employers. Chair Tanya Pofare says there is a zero tolerance for unethical employers and there are many doing right.
Our NZE members have been really concerned with the allegations because if they are doing everything in their power to do what's right and then we hear of allegations of people not doing the correct employment practices and to a high standard like themselves, it's really disappointing.
Tanya Pofare says 3 employers haven't been able to meet its standards since launching in June, and instead of leaving them behind, they are working to educate and help them improve.
It's 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program this evening on the immigration, reset of the reset. Government changing its position on nurses today, cost of living and what your Christmas dinner is going to cost you now. Let us know your thoughts also on MIQ or anything else you've heard on the program tonight. You can text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anea Evie, mena pita pita kōrero. Evie's here with the headlines.
From Thursday, registered nurses, specialist doctors and midwives will be able to apply for residency immediately, including those already in New Zealand. Since the Green List was established in July, nurses have had to work for 2 years to get residence. Immigration Minister Michael Wood told Checkpoint that more needed to be done to attract workers to New Zealand in a crowded global market. The Chief Ombudsman has told Checkpoint that many of the personal cases his office investigated when looking into the MIQ system were heart-wrenching. In a report released today, Peter Boscher says the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment didn't fully consider people's personal circumstances in its advice to government ministers. He says those left out in the cold under the system want their grievances to be taken seriously, and an apology would go a long way. The Health and Disability Commissioner has found a GP, a medical centre and a DHB all at fault after the death of a 3-year-old overdosed with adrenaline. In 2019, the girl went to the medical centre with a cough, then returned the next day with worsening asthma symptoms. She was overdosed with adrenaline after collapsing. And despite stunning weather, Auckland beachgoers faced a swimming ban today after heavy weekend rain caused sewage runoff at dozens of beaches. Wastewater overflow breached national guidelines for swimming at beaches, including Mission Bay, Takapuna and Titirangi. Auckland Council's Nick Vigar says sewage runoff is a common problem after heavy rain. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, the traffic around the country is routine at the moment, so I guess that's good. I'll have more news, a full news bulletin and weather at 6 o'clock.
I suppose it depends on your definition of routine. Ngā mihi, Evie. Returning to the government's immigration U-turn, green-lighting overseas nurses to jump straight on the path to residency, bypassing a previous 2-year work requirement. The changes were announced this afternoon following months of criticism from the health sector and opposition over nurses initially being left off the fast-track list. It's estimated Aotearoa is short about 4,000 nurses. New Zealand Nurses Organisation Kai Whakahaere Kauri Nuku joins us now. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
What do you think of the change?
Oh, look, it's a really welcomed change and a positive step in a long way forward.
So, do people still want to come here? Do nurses still want to come here?
Look, according to the Prime Minister, there's a lot that have made inquiries, and through Nursing Council, the regulatory body, anecdotally, what I'm hearing is Australia is a really attractive stopover. So we're competing internationally for a marketplace and for skilled workforce. So I'm not as convinced, I guess, as what some other parties are, that we're as attractive as, say, the likes of Australia.
Okay, so now that nurses are on the top tier of the green list, right, and they can go straight on the path to residency, what else do we need to make us more attractive if Australia is still more attractive than us?
Well, I think the Prime Minister talked about three things, talked about pay, conditions and certainty. And certainly the announcement today creates some certainty around the fast-tracking to residency. But we're still left with the issues of pay and condition and safety when we're at work. So I think those issues have not been addressed, and therefore, if they were, perhaps it would make us more attractive internationally.
Do you think the government understands that those are the things that are going to have to change?
Well, I would hope so, given the amount of time that nurses have verbalised that there are significant concerns around the pay, conditions and safety. I would hope that the government's heard that.
At the same time, it says it's getting ahead of the situation, is it?
Well, certainly the nurses on the floor don't feel that it is, and certainly every day we're hearing stories of nurses that are choosing to go to Australia on short-term contracts. So I'm not sure who's informing who, but certainly our nurses on the floor are not convinced.
Kerry, are you in any way puzzled as to why this has changed now, this setting? Because what's different from 6 months earlier when they left nurses off?
Look, nothing's changed except the conditions gotten worse within Aotearoa nurses and retaining them. And certainly internationally, every country is competing for nurses. So maybe the realisation is that this is a global response to a crisis, and everybody in every country is trying to attract nursing, and therefore New Zealand has had to up their game and increase their offer and fast track. But because there is no real change, I can see.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister says this will get us in front of the pack. Do you believe that?
No, I think Australia is certainly in front of the pack. Many of the nurses that I've spoken to internationally, New Zealand is great because we've offered this environment, this culture, this green hills, sea. But actually, when they look deeper into what Australia is offering, they become the alternative, and New Zealand becomes quite the second.
Kerry, the Prime Minister has indicated that there's going to be a cabinet reshuffle next year, right? Would you like to keep the health minister you've got, or do you want a new one?
But we want anyone that's going to start to take nursing seriously and start to look at addressing those issues around pay, conditions and safety when they're at work. And at the moment, as you can see, we're struggling at the moment, but also we've struggled previously under a national-led government. We just want somebody to take seriously nursing so we're not always on the back foot having to justify our position.
Kia ora rā, we thank you for your time this evening. That's the New Zealand Nurses Organisation Kai Whakahaere, Kauri Nuku there. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. FIFA is denying claims the defibrillator wasn't used on a US sports reporter who died suddenly at the weekend. High-profile sports writer Grant Wall collapsed while he was covering a football World Cup game on Saturday. Other reporters in the press box said medics arrived quickly and gave CPR, but there was no defibrillator. In a statement, FIFA says in line with protocols, a defibrillator was available with the first responders and was applied. Mr. Wall's being remembered as a charming, kind and talented journalist who was one of the first in the industry to highlight the talent of a very young LeBron James. CNN's Don Riddell has more.
At the most extraordinary World Cup game, the most devastating news. As the quarter-final match between Argentina and the Netherlands went into extra time, American soccer writer and broadcaster Grant Wall died after collapsing suddenly in the stadium. Just days before, the 49-year-old had spoken in his podcast about feeling unwell during the tournament.
My body, I think, told me, even after the U.S. went out, dude, you are not sleeping enough. And it rebelled on me. And so I've had a case of bronchitis this week. I've been to the medical clinic at the media center twice now.
After collapsing on Friday night, on-site medics reportedly spent 20 to 25 minutes treating Wall. News of his sudden death quickly sent shockwaves throughout the football community.
I was at the Netherlands game last night when all this horrible drama was unfolding. I wasn't aware of it at the time, so to wake up this morning and switch on my laptop and see the news was just devastating, really.
Wall made his name initially as a writer for Sports Illustrated, introducing then unknown high school basketball player LeBron James to the world through a memorable cover story.
Very fond of Grant, and you know, having that cover shoot, you know, me being a teenager and him covering that, it was a pretty cool thing.
But it was as a soccer writer that he made his greatest mark.
I'm Grant Wall, running for FIFA president.
In 2011, he used a campaign to run for FIFA president to expose the corruption within football's world governing body. Wall quickly emerged as a cheerleader for the beautiful game in North America, long before it was fashionable.
He was one of the first people to welcome me when I made my big move across the Atlantic. He was almost a missionary in that sense. He would travel around the globe telling people to take American soccer seriously.
In the run-up to the World Cup, Wall made it his mission to expose the deaths of migrant workers Qatar had enlisted to build the stadiums. He continued to advocate for human rights as soon as the tournament got underway, refusing to follow the demands of stadium security to remove a rainbow shirt worn in solidarity with the LGBTQ+ community. Wall told CNN that he was detained for 25 minutes by Qatari authorities for wearing the shirt.
They forcibly took my phone out of my hands. They made me stand in front of a CCTV camera. They continued to try to get me to take off my shirt.
He went on to receive apologies from a FIFA representative and a senior member of the security team. After spending 12 years writing about the build-up to Qatar, this tournament was Wall's 8th and final Men's World Cup. The tributes that have poured in have commended Wall's commitment to exposing injustices within the sport and cemented his legacy as one of the greatest advocates of American soccer.
Back home now, and new tools are being used in the battle to protect thousands of precious Kauri trees in Auckland's Waitakere Ranges. Parts of the Waitakere Ranges were closed to the public 5 years ago, with an estimated 1 in 5 trees infected with Kauri dieback. While there's no cure for the disease, progress has been made with track upgrades, reopening 50 kilometres of track. Our reporter Louise Tenuth went to check it out.
Kauri are among the world's mightiest trees, living for more than 2,000 years. Auckland's Waitakere Ranges are home to almost 70,000 of them, towering over 50 metres. But Kauri dieback disease poses a serious threat to them because it sits in the soil, infesting the root system, preventing water and nutrient uptake, starving the trees. Since 2017, Auckland Council's been working to detect and monitor the disease after closing off the forest to the public. Their most recent study used epidemiology to determine how many trees were infected. Auckland Council's Kauri dieback biosecurity manager Lisa Tolich says the results are promising.
Right across the Waitakere Ranges, in terms of an average prevalence,
that was 10%. We were surprised to find that the pathogen was in quite a small number of localised areas around the exterior of the park.
They also found new seedlings in areas where Kauri dieback was detected. Lisa Tolich says this gives them hope for a new generation of trees. Manager of Proactive Compliance, Adrian Wilson, is in charge of making sure people stay out of the closed tracks. Usually, if there's a breach, the person gets a warning letter or a trespass notice. After that, prosecution can follow. But with just 3 prosecutions across the Auckland region so far, he's confident that's working.
The last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months, it's gone down 44% in terms of the non-compliance. And I think the previous year was about 30%. So year on year, we're really reducing the numbers to just the odd few that choose not to comply. I mean, the idea is with these ones, they actually spray your shoe for you when you stand on it. So that's just to get off the main mud that you may have on your shoe, just loose stuff. And then these, as you stand on them, they'll spray your shoe.
Cleaning stations greet you at areas that have reopened, designed to get rid of as much debris on your shoes as possible. But Adrian says the best thing to do is make it a habit to clean your shoes before walking the track.
Back in the day when we first started, there was probably people accidentally going onto tracks, or, you know, I've always been walking this track, why shouldn't I go on them? And gradually they've been educated. You do get the odd one that really, you know, that they've always gone down that track and they like that particular track.
Right on cue, this cyclist attempts to get through, but this track is closed to bikes.
It's on the signage that you can't go on the bikes. We're telling you now you can't take your bike up here. Okay. There's no ability to clean the bike here, is there? It's not a cleaning station. Where you are allowed to, there'll be cleaning stations for bikes.
Stuart Layton's the senior advisor working on upgrading the tracks.
And that involves everything from boardwalks to upgraded gravel surfaces to installing like geocell products to help hold the gravel and surface in place, because what we want to try and achieve is a dry foot surface which makes it feasible for people to walk through. They're not damaging the root systems, and it also makes it really easy for them to clean their gear when they come out.
Sniffer dogs are also being trialled to detect the disease, with hopes to put them to work this summer.
We have such a wide range of contexts, from in a forest environment to it might be a small amount of soil on earth-moving equipment to trees that may be being transported across for planting purposes. So all of those things have different risk profiles, I guess, and the dogs need to be able to adapt to a lot of different environments.
Auckland Council's 3/4 of the way through upgrading tracks in the ranges, with more set to reopen this summer.
In a world first, a teenager's incurable cancer has been cleared from her body using a revolutionary new type of medicine. The groundbreaking treatment is called base editing and involves making genetic changes to donor cells, enabling them to attack her cancer. The BBC's Fergus Walsh met the 13-year-old survivor, Elisa.
Oh, this one's hard.
The whole experience has brought me so much closer with my family.
Alyssa is back home in Leicester thanks to a pioneering new cancer therapy. All other treatment options for her leukemia had failed.
Breathe in and breathe out. Thank you, that's a good one.
So in May, she received a world-first therapy.
I know that I've helped other children as well, that other children might be able to get cured because of the research that I've been part in.
It is extremely exciting. Obviously this is a new field in medicine, and it's fascinating that we can redirect the immune system to fight cancer.
Alyssa's immune system couldn't clear her cancer, so she was given donor cells which had been tweaked using a new technique called base editing. In the lab, 3 precise changes were made to the cell's DNA, and they were then armed to fight her cancer.
Base editing is part of a genetic revolution which is transforming our understanding of human biology. It is an incredibly precise tool with huge potential to treat and possibly cure a range of diseases, especially disorders of the blood.
10 children with T-cell leukemia will have the treatment as part of a clinical trial.
There's enormous amounts of innovation going on in terms of how we can use these new tools to manipulate and change bits of DNA, and our applications are to cure diseases, and I think there's enormous potential to do that across the board.
Homegrown alligator. see you later, gonna hit the road.
Alyssa is still receiving drugs to help her fight infection, and she'll have regular hospital checks. For now, cancer is undetectable in her blood.
To have had this extra year, even to have this last 3 months where she's been well and she's been at home and she's been doing what she's wanted, that's like a gift in itself.
When you see what she's gone through and the vitality for life that she's brought to every situation is astounding.
And she's got a lot to look forward to.
Christmas, definitely. My auntie's wedding. I'm going to be her bridesmaid. To go back to school. To hang out with my friends. I want to start riding my bike again, things like that.
So look at all these beads.
There's loads.
Can you even remember?
Every one of these beads represents a procedure Alyssa has undergone, a collection she's hoping to put away for good.
Pretty remarkable story there. Let's get to some of your feedback. There's lots of it. We'll start with immigration. Sarah says, how is it that the same government that acted with such agility and flexibility in the early days of COVID has more recently been so slow to respond on so many issues, fast-tracking nurses being the latest example? It's as if we've had two separate Labour governments. Question is, which one is the real one, says Sarah. On Auckland's infrastructure issues, and it literally raining pollution and having code browns at the beaches, sewage in the sea, surely proof the three waters is needed in Auckland, says that listener. And on the subject of MIQ, very mixed bag here in terms of your views on the Ombudsman's report, which says MB acted unreasonably, and he thinks that some apologies may be needed. Deb from Raglan says, I reckon if the government could acknowledge mistakes, including apologies, and ensure not to repeat them, like MIQ, then they are more likely to get more votes in the next election. It is not a weakness to apologise, rather it makes politicians human, says Deb. MIQ, we all knew there was no human compassion in the decisions, says that listener. Another one says, I can't keep listening to the complaining about the MIQ queue. It saved the majority of us. Individual cases, as hard as they may sound, we're never going to be prioritised over our safety. We have to accept that we did pretty well and move on. Another person says apologies from the Prime Minister would be a start. Too bad the judge didn't think about all New Zealanders being kept safe, this person says. And another says countries have obligations to their citizens, whether here or overseas.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. In a big backdown, the government will put nurses and midwives in the fastest lane for residency, meaning they can skip the existing 2-year work requirement. The turnaround comes after months of calls from the health sector to do just that. Speaking at her regular post-cabinet media conference, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, defended the time it's taken to act.
The numbers speak for themselves. When you have record numbers applying to the Nursing Council, internationally qualified nurses, record numbers applying for the ability to work in New Zealand, it demonstrates that we were attracting nurses. We want to get ahead of the issue, though. We've been asked to simplify it, and we've listened, and we've made that change.
Another 10 professions, including school teachers, will be put on a streamlined road to residence, though they will still have to work for 2 years first. Meanwhile, the Immigration Minister won't concede the decision in May to make nurses wait 2 years for residency was wrong. At the time, the government said it was worried foreign nurses hired in the rest home sector would leave for better paid jobs immediately if they were allowed to stay in the country permanently. Michael Wood has told Checkpoint things are different now.
Now, since that time, the Aged Care Association has changed their position, partly because of the fact that we're putting the money in to deal with that pay parity issue. So we've dealt with that as we're continuing to put money in to make sure that our nurses are paid well also.
Michael Wood says over the last few months, the international competition for nurses has become more intense. The Chief Ombudsman says people who were impacted by managed isolation have a right to justice. In a report released today, Peter Boscher says the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment acted unreasonably over MIQ and didn't consider personal circumstances. Mr Boscher has told Checkpoint that who apologises for MIQ is a matter for government ministers to ruminate on. He believes an apology will go a long way. Mr Boscher says there needs to be a sense of closure for those with genuine grievances. The organisers of a hikoi protesting the Kaipara Mayor say his backtracking won't stop the march. At the last full council meeting, Craig Jepson repeatedly interrupted Councillor Pere Pandiora when she tried to say a karakia. Community members have organised a hikoi to protest the Mayor's views, and a petition calling for him to stand down has more than 6,000 signatures. Last week, Mr Jepson agreed to councillors saying karakia on a rotating basis if they wished, but hikoi organisers say karakia should be embraced and respected at every hui, and they will still march on Wednesday. Rawene hospital managers say they've recruited 2 new locum doctors, but that's not enough to restore after-hours services yet. Since August, the 26-bed hospital serving the Hokianga hasn't been able to fill rosters. Sam Ollie reports from Te Tai Tokerau.
Currently, doctors are only on site 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. daily. Initially, the roster gap was meant to only last to November, but Hauora Hokianga, which runs the hospital, says despite some new hires, there are still not enough staff to fill a 24/7 doctors roster. Registered nurses are in charge in the evenings and overnight instead. For the past 3.5 months, patients needing urgent care after hours have been diverted to Whangarei, Kaitaia and Bay of Islands hospitals.
Aucklanders teased with stunning weather today instead faced a swimming ban after heavy weekend rain caused sewage runoff at dozens of beaches. The levels of faecal bacteria found in the wastewater overflow breaches national guidelines for swimming. Auckland Council's Nick Vega says waste system runoff is a common problem after heavy rain. St Heliers, Herne Bay, Takapuna and Titirangi Beach are among those deemed not safe for swimming. The US has taken custody of the Libyan man suspected of making the bomb that blew up an American plane over the Scottish town of Lockerbie in 1988. 270 people died in the attack, as the BBC's Sarah Smith reports from Washington.
Abu Aghela Massoud has already served a prison sentence in Libya for bomb making. He confessed to his involvement in the Lockerbie bombing to a Libyan law enforcement official more than 10 years ago. Last month it was reported he had been kidnapped in Libya, leading to speculation he was going to be handed over to the American authorities. He's expected to appear in a federal court in Washington soon. In the nearly 34 years since the bombing, only one man has ever been convicted of the murderous attack. Abdelbasit Al-Megrahi stood trial in 2001. He was jailed for life, but released on compassionate grounds after being diagnosed with cancer before dying in Libya.
Auckland Council is continuing to hunt for a dog and its owner after a child was hospitalised on Sunday. Police were called to the dog attack on Farringdon Street in the suburb of Glen Innes around 2:30am. Council Animal Management Team Manager Ali Waitoa says an investigation is underway to locate the dog and its owner. Ms Waitoa says Council has previously received reports of dogs roaming in the area and has been patrolling and speaking to dog owners. She says roaming dogs may be impounded and their owners fined. And NASA's uncrewed Orion capsule has splashed down in the Pacific, ending its 3-week test mission around the moon. The space agency aims to return astronauts there and will focus on how Orion's heat shield coped after sustaining high temperatures on re-entry into the atmosphere. Jim Free from NASA says the mission went better than expected.
The tests that we had planned to do on it exceeded our expectations. We're actually able to add a number of tests to continue to push the spacecraft past its limits to be prepared for our Artemis 2 mission in about 2 years, where we'll have crew on it for the first time.
The capsule splashed down west of Mexico in the Pacific. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we're celebrating the music of South America and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra as they celebrate 75 years. Tonight, Miranda Harcourt chooses a classical piece. We've got jazz with Fergus Barrowman and sport with Brian Waddell, plus the greatest snacks of all time. It's got to be chips, doesn't it? Join us on Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile through the free RNZ app. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, mostly fine. Some isolated showers this afternoon and again tomorrow for the Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumarunui, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Isolated showers today, some heavy with possible thunderstorms about eastern Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Tomorrow, scattered showers showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. From Waipomo to Wellington, including Taihape, also Wairarapa, fine today. Showers tomorrow, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. Marlborough and Nelson, mostly fine. Isolated showers inland this afternoon and evening, possibly heavy. Bulla and Westland, a few showers, fine spells developing. Canterbury, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy about the east coast with patchy drizzle tomorrow morning, then becoming fine around midday tomorrow. Mainly fine elsewhere. Isolated showers this afternoon and evening. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, low cloud and occasional rain clearing tomorrow afternoon. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. People are being encouraged to apply for compensation if their vehicles are damaged as a result of a shoddy chip seal job that broke up and stuck to cars travelling along State Highway 1 north of Auckland at the weekend. Waka Kotahi was due to start repairs on the stretch of the highway near Dome Valley between Warkworth and Wellsford today. It says the seal, originally laid by Fulton Hogan, fell short of expectations and was compromised by weather conditions. Well, joining us now is Jackie Hori-Holt from Waka Kotahi. Hi Jackie, what exactly went wrong with the original seal?
Kia ora, Lisa. The chip seal work that we did through the Dome Valley hasn't worked as well as what we'd expected, and what happened was that with the rain that came through on Thursday night, it actually started to strip the seal off, and the team, Fulton Hogan, had been really proactive getting in there to advise us that we needed to do something different, and we'd made a plan already to come and do some work, and that is to change it to an asphalt site. Unfortunately, on Saturday, with the humidity and heat, what was left of that stripping had actually become quite lively, which meant it sort of melted the top surface, and that's what we saw with regards to the damage to the vehicles.
So, Jackie, in layperson's terms, great gobs of the top layer of the road were coming off and attaching themselves to people's wheels and underside of their vehicles, yes?
Yes. That's
okay.
What we saw.
That sounds dangerous, was it?
It's not. It's probably an inconvenience to to our customers on that Saturday, but our teams got in there very quickly. We are going to be out.
But it created a rough road surface, didn't it, Jackie? A pocked road surface in pretty poor weather conditions. That's not great.
Look, no, it's not a great outcome for Fulton Hogan and for Waka Kotahi, but our teams were really proactive in getting out there quickly to put some traffic management, because that safety is paramount for our customers, and also to make sure that we could have the plans to get in there and do the asphalt surface, which was deferred last night because of the weather, and the teams are getting ready now to be out there to be able to make the full repair tonight.
Okay, so Fulton Hogan botched the job, in short. Who pays for it to be fixed?
So Fulton Hogan this work will be paid for by Fulton Hogan. And look, our teams work really hard to make sure we get a right outcome, and unfortunately in this situation it hasn't been, but we'll work really closely with our team. They are a really smart team when it comes to asset management, but unfortunately we didn't get the outcome this time.
So will they get paid for the original job, Jackie, given it was so bad?
Oh, look, we'll work through that, but the rework won't be at Waka Kotahi's cost.
Yeah, but the rework is patching up a bad first job, and I'm just wondering why they chose the wrong seal, and did they not check the weather forecast? Because you're saying that wrong seal and weather conditions is what made this twice as bad. So didn't they check those things?
Yes, they did. Look, they'd already started. The work had been completed earlier in the week, and it looked like it was going to be able to be opened up. That's what the team did. But unfortunately, with the weather conditions that came in on the Thursday night, with the heavy rain that went through the site, we'd actually got some lost chip.
So, Waka Kotahi is directing motorists to Fulton Hogan for compensation claims, yeah?
That's correct.
And do you know what volume of people have been in touch around compensation and damage to their vehicles?
Look, no, I don't know that information at this point in time, but we have, through our media release, put out contact for directly going to Fulton Hogan, and that's been agreed with the Fulton Hogan senior management.
And the patch-up job, how long is it going to take to fix this stretch of the road up at a busy time of the year?
Oh, look, the team are planning. They should be starting to set up site now, and they'll be in there to change it to an asphalt site. So that work should be completed this evening, and we've got another closure planned for tomorrow night as well.
OK, this state highway is causing a bit of problems further up the route as well. What's happening with the repairs in the Mongamuka Gorge?
Oh, so yes, with regards to the Mongamuka Gorge, look, we've been able to get some funding to look at what we can do to preserve and protect State Highway 1 at the moment. And we acknowledge that there is a need to reconnect State Highway 1. It's a critical link for far north communities and for the businesses and the rest of Northland. So we've got the funding to immediately recover the work to protect Mongamuka Gorge. We are working really closely with our partners to what that could look like, the extent to the full remediation.
Timeline, Jackie, because that's what residents will be most concerned about. What's your timeline for getting it done?
For the work to fix the whole site?
Yeah, so that people don't have to take the diversion. How long until that is reopened for people to travel back and forth?
So Waka Kotahi and our teams are still working on what that timeline is going to be looking like, Lisa.
Thank you for joining us. That is Jackie Hori-Holt from Waka Kotahi. The man accused of making the bomb that destroyed the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie 34 years ago is finally in custody in the United States. The US announced charges against the Libyan man 2 years ago. The blast left 270 people dead and remains the deadliest terrorist incident on British soil. The BBC's James Landale has more.
It was just after 7 in the evening on the 21st of December 1988 when the town of Lockerbie was engulfed in flame. Pan Am Flight 103 had left Heathrow for New York, but in the skies above Scotland a massive explosion ripped through its fuselage and down it came. Most of the 259 passengers and crew were American. They all died, as did 11 others whose homes were struck by falling debris. It remains the worst act of terrorism in British history. This is the man the US authorities accuse of making the bomb, Abu Ajayla Massoud. 2 years ago, the US Attorney General formally charged Massoud with making the device which brought down Flight 103. But he remained in Libya, and only now have the US authorities been able to get access to him and take him into their custody in circumstances which remain unclear. Cara Vibes, whose brother Rick Manetti died at Lockerbie, hoped justice could now be done.
To know now that one of those who's involved in the bombing is coming to the US to stand trial and face justice through our legal system, I think that it is something that we have been fighting for over 3 decades. So I think there is a sense of finally justice for our loved ones.
The only man to have been convicted of the Lockerbie bombing, Abdul Basit al-Megrahi. He was jailed in 2001, but later released and allowed to return home to Libya because he was dying of cancer. His conviction was subject to several appeals, doubts that were echoed by some victims' families, including John Mosey, whose daughter Helga died.
Fills my mind with questions, really. First of all, why is it taking so long? Secondly, what's he doing in America? This was a crime committed on above Scottish soil, but which came to land on Scottish soil. Therefore, it's the responsibility of the Scottish legal system.
So with the anniversary of the bombing only days away, the search for justice for those who died continues, 34 years on.
It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The FIFA World Cup semi-finalists are set and there are a couple of big surprises, especially Morocco, the first African side to reach the final four after upsetting Portugal over the weekend. Their fans are soaking up the occasion before they play the French favourites on Thursday morning. Take a listen.
Where is Ronaldo? He's there. Where is Ronaldo? He's there.
What to say? What a joy. I never imagined it. We are the first African country to reach the World Cup semi-finals. What can I say?
We made history today.
for all the Arabs and Africans. Congratulations to all Moroccans around the world.
It was a fairly close match. Portugal played well. Well done to them, but we're stronger.
It was a great game today. The team did not let us down. Instead, they made us proud. They made our country proud. They made the Arab world proud.
Meanwhile, English football fans are still coming to terms with their heartbreaking defeat to France. Captain Harry Kane missed a penalty shot, which would have tied the game, but England legend Alan Shearer says the team should be proud.
Normally when you get dumped out of a tournament, then you can hear the criticism from miles away, but that's not the case now, because I think they played well. They've excited us in this tournament. They've got everyone behind them. And when you get knocked out of a tournament, so long as you can look in the mirror and say, you know what, I actually gave everything, and it just wasn't to be. And I think that England squad can do that. I think they can all be proud of themselves. They'll be hurting like hell for a while, and I get that and I understand that. But they gave everything, and I think that's the most important thing.
In the other semi-final, Croatia take on Argentina and perhaps the greatest player of all time, Lionel Messi. Multiple explosions have been reported in a Russian-occupied city in southern Ukraine, including at a Russian military barracks in Crimea. But fighting is slowing in Ukraine as the harsh winter sets in. Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are desperately trying to gather enough supplies to see it out. Deutsche Welle's Arndt Henzer has more.
Speed is of the essence. Ludmila Bila distributes water and food for air raid shelters in Bakhmut. Much of the frontline city in the Donetsk region is in ruins. The few who get stoves for the winter are the lucky ones.
It's unbearable. It's so cold and there aren't any blankets. It's just a few degrees above freezing in the house.
Sometimes Ludmila and the team manage to create a little joy amid the horror. A week ago, she rescued a boy and brought him to her family. Now, she's been able to bring his mother too.
I have a present for you. Let's call out to Mama, really loud.
The Russian Defence Ministry has released pictures of young reservists being transferred to the front, equipped with new rifles and winterised uniforms. The clip is meant to push back at widespread reports that reservists are in fact poorly equipped and just used as cannon fodder in Ukraine. Here, the outskirts of Donetsk, on the Russian-occupied side of the front. Again, no electricity and water. Rocket fire is constant.
We just don't want anything anymore. Not riches or other pleasures. Just to go to bed and wake up in peace. Not like now. When I wake up, I see all the horror before my eyes.
Another night awaits, full of rocket fire and destruction raining from the sky.
I'm here to take you home. That's what a top US diplomat told Brittany Griner before their 18-hour flight from Russia last week. The US Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens, has described what it was like to be in the middle of a high-profile prisoner swap, greeting the basketball star at a Russian airport.
It's always kind of an exciting moment when you jump on the other country's plane and walk up to a person, in this case Brittany. And I'll tell you what I told her. I said, Brittany, my name is Ambassador Roger Carstens. I'm with the U.S. Department of State. And on behalf of the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, I'm here to take you home. And at that moment, I think every person finally starts to realize that it's going to happen. It's setting in. Certainly Brittany felt that way. And at that point, we have to go through a little more of the choreography to get her on the plane. Usually takes about 3 minutes. But here's what I wouldn't mind telling you. When she finally got onto the U.S. plane, I said, Brittany, you must have been through a lot over the last 10 months. Here's your seat. Please feel free to decompress. We'll give you your space. And she said, oh no, I've been in prison for 10 months now listening to Russian. I want to talk. But first of all, who are these guys? And she moved right past me and went to every member on that crew, looked them in the eyes, shook their hands, and asked about them, got their names, making a personal connection with them. It was really amazing. And then later on an 18-hour flight, she probably spent 12 hours just talking. And we talked about everything under the sun. And I was left with the impression that this is an intelligent, passionate, compassionate, humble, interesting person, a patriotic person.
With more on the fallout from the prisoner swap deal, here's the BBC's Azadeh Moshiri.
What's your mood? Happy.
Relief for basketball star Brittany Griner. But to bring her home, the White House gave in to some of Russia's demands. That included leaving former US Marine Paul Whelan behind. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison in 2018 on spying charges.
There have been disappointments in the past. I think this one maybe struck us a little bit harder, as we had been expecting, based on the State Department statements about a substantial offer being made to the Russian government that Paul would be coming home. The White House, the Biden administration, has been much more open about what's been going on, and that's helpful to detainee families. There's still a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So we might not know until the very last minute, and it could happen anytime. But my concern is that as months go by, and probably years at this point go by, my parents may not be back or may not be here for Paul.
There's also the matter of Victor Boot, known as the Merchant of Death. The notorious arms dealer was exchanged for Brittany Griner, a professional athlete. He told Russian media that he wished her good luck on the tarmac. Republicans argued this swap warranted 2 Americans in exchange. It's put the White House on the defense.
They were not willing and I said this yesterday, to negotiate in good faith for Paul Whelan. And so it was either Brittany Griner, 1 American, or no American.
Absolutely refuses to talk to me about...
As for Paul Whelan, there's still hope. Russia and the United States signalled a rare moment of cooperation amidst the war in Ukraine.
Are other exchanges possible? Yes, everything is possible. This is the result of negotiations and the search for compromises.
Whether it was a good deal or a bad one, this is the reality of prisoner swaps. Joy for some and pain for others.
NASA is a step closer to putting humans on the moon once again, following the successful re-entry of its new astronaut capsule. The Orion splashed down in the Pacific Ocean after a 26-day mission to orbit the moon. There were no humans on board, but the successful test run paves the way for future missions. The ABC's Oliver Gordon has this report.
Time to splash down 90 seconds.
Mission Control commanders in Houston, Texas watch on as the Orion capsule makes a fiery re-entry into Earth's atmosphere.
Perfect descent rate reported.
After 26 days on a mission to orbit the moon, getting the aircraft back is one of the most challenging moments. Thankfully, it went to plan.
And there it is, high over the Pacific, America's new ticket to ride to the moon and beyond now in view. Splashdown. From Tranquility Base to Taurus Littrow to the tranquil waters of the Pacific, the latest chapter of NASA's journey to the moon comes to a close. Orion, back on Earth.
Alexandra Whitsey is a correspondent for Nature magazine.
It's a really big deal for NASA because it's kind of what they see as a sequel to the Apollo program. You remember the Apollo astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, landing on the moon more than 50 years ago. And in fact, 50 years ago today was the very day that the last 2 moonwalkers landed on the moon. So NASA's been for half a century not going back. And today is the first test flight. No astronauts were on board, but it was the first test flight of what they see as their next step after Apollo. They're calling it the Artemis program. Artemis is the sister, of course, of Apollo in mythology.
50 years on, much of the technology has evolved. It appears the heat shield, built to withstand temperatures of up to 3,000 degrees Celsius on re-entry, performed well. Alexandra Whitsey says scientists will now start inspecting it for further analysis.
So the engineers will be looking at, where are things burned? How are things kind of beat up? They also have a whole bunch of sensors around the spacecraft. How fast did it come in? What kind of G-forces were in the capsule? And they'll all use that to think about, okay, next time we fly this capsule, there'll be humans in it. What kind of environment will those humans be experiencing? Will it protect them from the heat? Will it protect them from the G-forces? So they'll be looking for physical signs on the capsule that talk about what it went through during this fire re-entry today.
NASA also trialled a new way of safely returning spacecraft back to this planet. For re-entry, it skipped the Orion capsule like a stone, bouncing along the Earth's atmosphere to allow it to get closer to the large Navy ships waiting in the Pacific.
It skips across the atmosphere and it can drop right next to that Navy ship. They came down less than 10 kilometers from the ship, which is amazing. Back in the Apollo days, you'd have to send your ship steaming, hundreds of kilometers to go pick up the capsule that had come back. So the skip let them land really precisely off the coast of Mexico today.
So when can we expect to see boots on the moon once again? Alexandra Whitsey says Artemis's next flight will be an orbit mission with humans aboard. But plans are afoot for another landing in the coming years.
The next Artemis flight is going to go around the moon. So that could be 2024. If I had to guess, I'd see more 2025. So that's going to fly around. And then in terms of boots on the moon, like actual landing on the moon with humans, that's like the $1 million question right now. NASA says 2025, but all bets from space policy folks are that it'll take a lot longer. So maybe later this decade for sure.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on immigration. Actually, no, let's talk about MIQ. This is the Ombudsman's report into MIQ saying that it was unreasonable the way it was set up by MB. Maureen says, Lisa, hindsight is a great thing, followed by about 5 exclamation marks. We are seriously suffering from an unprecedented situation. So many other governments handled it atrociously. Mr. Bosha, 5 question marks, referring to the Ombudsman in his report. Someone else says, I was stuck in New Zealand trying to get home using the original hit and refresh system. It was a nightmare and extremely distressing. MIQ kept New Zealanders safe. I eventually secured a spot 4 months later than I wanted to get home. However, it did work, says Hamish. Another says, it was hard to look at the MIQ issue in this new post-lockdown light. Yes, it was very tough for people trying to get home, but it was reasonably consistent, they say, with our stance of protecting our population while getting vaxxers in arms and eventually having a very low death rate. Easy to blame the government, but to be honest, it was a very tough time for many in health and policy areas, they say. The pressure on making recommendations fell heavily on Dr. Bloomfield's shoulders, hence he left his post early, says Sally from Wally. Actually, it's an interesting read, their Ombudsman's report. You should check it out. They say ministers were heavily involved in the decision-making process. So all we've got time for this evening, ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up speaks to National's Deputy Leader Nicola Willis for the last time this year about immigration and the RNZ TVNZ merger. Make sure you tune in for that one.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Prime Minister has defended the time it's taken to put nurses and midwives into the fastest lane for residency. The Chief Ombudsman says people affected by managed isolation have a right to justice. The organisers of a hikoi protesting the Kaipara Mayor, who repeatedly interrupted a karakia during a council meeting, say his backtracking on the issue won't stop their march. And Auckland Council is looking for a dog and its owner after a child was hospitalised on Sunday from a dog bite. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock.
Pacific Waves, delving deeper into the major Pacific stories of the week in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the region and the world. I bring you interviews with Pacific newsmakers, experts and commentators in their fields, as well as up-to-date coverage from our talented team here at RNZ Pacific and our correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves, 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
Kia ora anō. Hello again. You're with Evie Ashton and you're listening to Trending Now. We begin with the detail. Artificial intelligence continues to seep into our daily lives. But what are the ethical implications of it?
One of the interesting things about watching movies and TV shows from before around 2010 is seeing artefacts from the ancient past that I actually once used. Things like landline